And hello, PaizoCon Day 3, and welcome back to our Therapeutics and TTRP. And I've lost it. Panel's dead. I've killed us all. Welcome back to Therapeutics and TTRPGs panel. I'd like to introduce two of my, if you've seen them already this weekend, Shay and John, and our special guest, Elizabeth, who is from Take This. I guess I will start with you, Elizabeth. Introduce a little bit of yourself and your relation to therapeutics, TTRPGs, and so on.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to be here. So my name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm a qualitative researcher with the nonprofit organization Take This. Take This is the oldest nonprofit to serve both the mental health and like games community as well as the games industry, with a focus on reducing stigma and kind of increasing positive mental health in the space. I have been using therapeutically applied RPGs for years. I don't know if you can see it in the little box on Twitch, but behind me is my book that was published last year. So I wrote this with a couple of really awesome co-authors about using tabletop role-playing games in different therapeutic applications. I've had the opportunity to run therapeutic games with ages 8 through 18 in groups focused around trauma use, substance use, military veterans, with kids, adolescents, and adults, and a big focus on neurodivergence, like ADHD, autism as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. I guess I will throw it over to Shay.
Hi, I'm Shay. I'm one of the Pathfinder Society developers. I have been using tabletop RPGs to kind of cope with a lot of my own stuff. I am neurodivergent with trauma, and I use it also to help with my friends who have issues.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And John.
I'm John Compton. I'm senior developer on Pathfinder's Adventure Pathline, and so I have done a whole bunch of adventure writing and GMing. The way I got into Paizo's circuit was through volunteering through organized play, but also through creating GM 101, which was a GM problem-solving sort of little mini game where it was like, here's the issue. If you want, here's a complication. Okay, try to roleplay resolving this interpersonal dilemma in the next 3 minutes of roleplay. I've also explored through some of the scenarios, some psychological issues. Particularly, there are a couple of scenarios that I did that were kind of PTSD related, and exploring, especially from the perspective of, realistically speaking, all of our adventurers are going to need therapy within at least 3 years on the job. And beyond that, as I mentioned a couple panels ago, my early GMing was one of great antagonism toward the players, and through gaming for a long time, especially wordplay, it's helped to work out a lot of my kind of competitive instincts and set up personal boundaries and conflict resolution to be a better person at the table.
Ooh, fantastic. Thank you. And hello all. I'm Marissa Marie. I'm going to be our moderator this afternoon. My relation is I am an avid therapy goer. My therapist has no idea about TTRPGs or anything. I have been that person who has logged into therapy with my character name, and I've had to explain to him what a tiefling ranger is. He is very fascinated by it. It's been a fun conversation. But I'm going to be leading the conversation, mostly just asking questions here, very similar to the teaching and TTRPGs panel we had a couple of hours ago. And so I will just get right into it. Let's start with, a couple of, I don't want to call them softball questions, but like really good introductory questions. So like, how can tabletop RPGs be used in a therapeutic setting? And I'll just throw it to anybody out there, whoever wants to start the conversation.
I can jump in. I promise not to be the first to answer all of the questions. Just a little bit impulsive. So when we are talking about therapeutic tabletop RPGs, I think it's important to think about kind of the spectrum of what might be considered therapeutic. So we have, on one end, we have like psychotherapy or like counseling, depending on the projected terms where you are. And so that is going to be like a mental health professional who is usually like trained or licensed and is using a tabletop RPG inside of kind of a specific therapy setting. That's typically going to be group, but it can be, there are some applications in individual as well, especially for things like talking about your character and how your character connects to you, those kinds of pieces, looking at that growth over time. When we think about therapeutic more broadly, that is going to be things like social skills groups, or thinking about working through some of your own stuff and understanding and building a better understanding of yourself and ways that you can kind of grow and change and connect with other people over time. Even in those kind of non-psychotherapy therapeutic setting, it's still really important that we talk about kind of consent and we talk about what people's expectations are when they're showing up to the table. But tabletop RPGs can probably be amazingly helpful because they create this low stakes setting for us to get to practice, try on new identities, understand new patterns of relating and being to other people, and getting a better ability to kind of like notice what is happening in the moment, often a little bit more distant from our real world emotions in the same way.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is worth bringing up also is that you can have the explicit or explicit buy-in point of TTRPGs as therapy, but any game that you're going to sit down to, whether you're saying it or not, can be serving that purpose for different people at the table, whether they know it or not, whether they're communicating it to the rest of folks is not. So the person second to your left might be using this opportunity to work through some of their own stuff, and it's worth being cognizant of that, especially if it starts popping up as like what we'd consider a behavioral issue. It's like, okay, time to communicate. What are you really trying to get out of this, and how can I help?
Yeah, I mean, using it as a therapeutic element, again, just my caveat for the whole panel, I am not a therapist. I am not a licensed professional or anything like that, but I have found that little bits of TTRPGs can be used as great exposure therapy. For instance, I have a friend who has very, very severe arachnophobia, and the way that we've kind of slowly been helping her kind of, work through that is I introduced a naughty into our little world. If you don't know what a naughty is, they're a Pathfinder ancestry. They look like spiders. They look like jumping spider people. And they're very cute, and they're very, very popular. And she is very kind of slowly kind of growing more used to these, and she's really enjoying it, so.
One other thing I'll toss in as well is like, when it comes to using TTRPGs as therapy, it's a matter of boundaries or expectations as well. So like, for example, she's like, we're helping our friend overcome arachnophobia because they asked us to.
She asked for it. She very much was like, this is a problem.
Yeah, as
So.
opposed to, Shay, you keep on being scared of lizards, so now we're going to play this Against the Dragons adventure.
I was gonna say, yeah, I think it's a pretty good, like, it can be said every single time, consent is key and matters always, and we always respect boundaries. Always, always, always respect boundaries. Though speaking of boundaries, and that was a really terrible segue, and I'm going to try not to push boundaries, so if you're not comfortable answering this question, we can totally cross it off the list. Does anybody have any personal experience with therapeutic gameplay, either as a facilitator, a player, a researcher, that they are comfortable sharing?
Yeah. So, I a little bit of background on me. This is something I'm very comfortable sharing and something that I have addressed a long time. I am an ex-drug addict. I had an addiction in high school to a heavy drug, and kind of cold turkeyed my way off of that with the help of basically an Alcoholics Anonymous group for teenagers, which was very helpful. But there was a lot that went along with that I didn't really get to process at that time, because I was also in high school and doing a whole bunch of things and about to go into college and stuff. However, what was very helpful was one of my friends was like, okay, well, we're going to run this game. I keep talking about this. I'm in a very long-term Monster Hearts game. John is aware of this. It's been on for like 5 years. And the good thing with Monster Hearts is it's one of those games where you can really kind of dig into trauma and interpersonal conflict and things like that. On the cover, it sounds silly, like you are monsters, but you are teenagers. But it really does allow you to kind of dig into, like, why do you do these things? How does this affect other people? And one of the things that really helped me was playing a character who was coming out of addiction and moving through becoming a person in real life. And it was very helpful, and it was very touching. We were able to go through a lot of scenes where, like, she went through some temptation to go back to her old ways. She went through a few scenes where like she discussed with her family like the ways that what she had been doing hurt them and how they were now growing from it, and it was very, very touching. Also, my friend offered to do this, and they were very helpful with it. And I did not put them in the uncomfortable situation where I was like, "Help me with this thing, go." So
We're gonna touch on some really traumatic stuff I haven't told any of y'all about right now.
let's go. But it's fantastic, honestly. So
That's
Awesome.
such a great example. I'm not sure if you ever had any experience when you were in substance use treatment around like the role playing that would happen in terms of like, oh, we're gonna like practice saying no to things.
yeah,
And they're often the most dry, awkward, like uncomfortable, not at all. Because it's like you and your therapist, or like you and another person in the program that's like practicing saying no when you're also in no way, shape, or form actually around any kind of substances.
yeah,
And it can feel so different from real life. When running groups with individuals in substance use treatment, getting that opportunity to practice those like self-advocacy skills and those planning skills, even if they weren't always directly tied into the like asking for or obtaining or saying no to substances in game, just that practice of, oh, I don't want to do that thing and I don't have to explain why, or I'm going to make a choice to do something else and go out of my kind of normal habit because I know my normal habit takes me by the liquor store or takes me by my old dealer's house. And so getting to engage in that in a space that is also fun can be so powerful for people. When I was running groups for substance use, that was something that we would see. We have way better retention for those groups, and people would often say that they felt like they were actually able to kind of learn more and come out of that. I'd love to share a story actually sparked by somebody in the comments. So I'm glad you come to some of my trainings and had a good experience. Tabletop RPGs can be a great place for us to get to kind of try on new identities and try on potentially telling people about some of those identities. So I've had experiences both with adolescents as well as military veterans where they kind of gained more and more confidence within the group. And then I had a veteran one time whose character came out as gay. And the rest of the group was like, okay, that's cool for your character. Your character doesn't like any of our characters, right? No? Okay, that's good because we don't think our, okay, cool. So we have this like very sweet, very awkward like navigation of like, okay, that is fine. We don't totally understand why it's happening because it doesn't seem super relevant, but that's cool. We're going to go rescue some kids who have been kidnapped now. Whole group moves on. A couple weeks later, COVID hits and our groups transfer from in-person groups to phone groups for one brief moment before we're able to do video because of the joys of working in a giant bureaucracy. And on this phone, during the middle of this phone group, we get to kind of the processing space, and this same veteran whose character had come out a couple weeks prior came out to the whole group as gay. And it was a really positive experience for them. It was also a positive experience for some of the group members who expressed that they didn't necessarily know anybody else in their life who identified as part of the LGBTQIA spectrum, and that this was really helpful for them to kind of like see that this was, oh, like you're just a dude we played D&D with, and like that's cool. You're not actually any different. We just know this extra thing about you. And that veteran was able to express that, like this is something they'd known for decades and had never felt comfortable really sharing or telling people. And so getting to have that practice of coming out to the group without it necessarily being real through their character allowed them to feel much safer and be able to do it kind of in that more real world setting.
And the idea of trying on different identities, it is both a serious sort of meme or stereotype, but also really true to an extent, empowering one of like, yeah, all these guys trying out female characters and, you know, X percentage of them eventually being trans. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a space where I think we, even if it's not like a kind of like big or visible identity piece, there are plenty of times in which, you know, if you go off to college or even you go to high school or you move somewhere else for a new job and like you kind of change over time and you go back to your hometown and everybody treats you like you're still 12. And that can be really hard. And as we're in this space where we're trying to figure out, oh, maybe I want to be more assertive, or maybe I want to be more like thoughtful and considerate in my life, or maybe I want to change the way that I engage with people. As we're trying to figure that out, oftentimes the people in our real world will react pretty strongly because they're like, whoa, something is different. What is changing? And especially when you're still practicing, you're still figuring out like how do I want to engage with people? There's going to be some kind of trial and error in that period. And so oftentimes having that opportunity to try that in tabletop allows you to go, oh, that is not the way that I want to present to the world, without it having to be this big thing where you kind of have to go back on it, if that makes sense.
This outfit was interesting. Back to the changing room.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The idea of helping people out of their shell, helping people get more confidence. That's sort of one of my more recent exposures or examples. Is our home group has a person who is dreadfully shy, and like started up therapy maybe 3 years ago or so to kind of help, among other things, with that confidence and expressing themselves and things like that. But providing not only a comfortable environment for them to be doing that at the game table is helpful, but also we can consider what our role is, not only as players, but as a GM, to facilitate and solicit that sort of involvement. So it's like I was just posting in our GM tips and tricks area or follow-up discussion of like, sometimes as a GM you can say, okay, I already know, we now know what mouthy sorcerer character is saying because that player doesn't shut up, but shy person, what would you like to be doing during this time? And you hear them out and you celebrate whatever that idea is. You incorporate it, you empower them through that. And it's a constant cycle, and it's a gradual cycle of building them up.
That's all. Oh, sorry.
Well,
Do you want to keep this one going?
I love that. And I think one of the powerful things is, as a GM, you control the environment too. So there are ways you can do that instead of just saying like, oh, I'm going to call on you, right? But if you have maybe an NPC that only speaks the language, the character who speaks up less is able to use, or maybe that character has access to this particular artifact or thing that allows them to have this kind of more defined role that gives them that kind of protected space to speak up or share their ideas. And so getting to use the environment to support players is one of the things that I love the most about this intervention.
And something quick to add to that is in RPGs, the idea of niche protection, where if we have two characters who are like two rogues, and Shay's rogue is superior to mine in almost every way, and every time a lock shows up, we don't need two rogues to throw at it, so Shay always does it. Well, as you kind of identify what my character might be good at, whether that's narrative or mechanical, then you can start to, as a GM, start to carve off a little bit of a niche protection for me, so there are places that I can shine and that I don't feel overshadowed or spoken over or what have you. And the larger your group, the more you're going to get into that sort of role. And so when it comes to building up confidence and just overall helping everybody have fun, keeping those niches in mind so that everybody can share a spotlight is really important.
That has all been fantastic, and I love that you all have been just like playing off of each other. Are we ready for me to go into the next question, or do we have anything else we want to add on to this? Because this has been great. No, fantastic. Speaking of like GM being able to control the setting and niche stuff, and me realizing that the word boundary is in this question, and I would have been able to have a much better segue than last time. What are some boundary and safety tool adjustments do you recommend for like therapeutic gameplay settings?
Consent forms are my big thing. I talked about it in our last panel was Tian Shaw. The panel before that, which was GM tips and tricks, is one of my big things is I always send out a big consent form, and it includes pretty much everything I can think of. As I mentioned in that panel, I run a lot of historical things. Like I've had a Regency game, and I've had like a turn of the century game and things like that. So I'm like, do you want to talk about transphobia or homophobia or internalized racism or things like that, or do we want to ignore that? Do we want to cut that off? Do you want to talk about bugs and spiders and crawlies and things like that, or do we just want to eliminate that and not worry about it at all? Do you want to avoid harm to children or the elderly or things like that, or are you okay if this happens and we vaguely reference like, oh, there was a da 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 da, things like that. So consent forms are a big deal to me, and I have a generic set that I grabbed and I have just sent out to every person, and that allows me to kind of build the world out.
And one little thing to add into that is it also applies to what the characters' backgrounds are. So it could be that they're totally fine with like child endangerment plot lines, but they don't want the nephew and niece that they invented in their character backstory to be involved. So that can be another layer of it that you can consider. Or they're entirely not okay with child endangerment stuff, but they recognize that by including a nephew and a niece, they are giving the GM tools to tear apart their emotions.
Yeah. Oh, and a big key thing on that is I make those forms anonymous, so that nobody has to feel like, okay, I can zero in on you. You're the one who said don't hurt my nephew and niece. Why don't you want me? So I have no idea who's sending these in to me. It's just helpful. So.
Yep. Plus one to what y'all have said. I love consent checklists. So I think those are really important in any type of tabletop game. Lines and veils or X cards, something that in addition to that checklist, we also have that ability to step in the moment. If you have somebody who's saying, like, yeah, I want to work on being more comfortable with spiders, they also need to be able to in the moment go, oh, that was too far. Or like, today was a bad day and I don't have the emotional bandwidth to be able to handle this today. So that ability to check in, and then the normalization that is going to be used. When it comes to the consent checklist, I will ask people kind of the things they don't want. I also ask the things that they do want to see. Shay, you kind of talked about this as well in terms of, do we want there to be no homophobia, or do we want there to be homophobia that you can do something about?
Yeah.
So that kind of that piece, or homophobia, but it's not directed at you, but it exists in the world, because that is going to be different for every player. I actually will get, when I get those lists from people, I want to know if I'm the GM, I want to know which of my players is turning in which list, because I may have specific follow-up questions, or I may want to kind of better understand some of the kind of like where the boundaries are, to make sure that I am appropriately respecting them. But when I kind of turn the list over to players in terms of, hey, here are the things that we're not going to bring up, that is going to be mixed in and anonymized, so no one's going to know where that is. I also will use like general like ratings. So like, hey, this is gonna be like a PG game, or this is a PG-13 game. This is an R-rated game when it comes to these content, but not this content. Some of that is also going to depend on my setting, right? If I'm playing with 10-year-olds versus I'm playing with 35-year-olds, if I'm doing this within the VA system, those kinds of pieces I think are really important. When it comes to those therapeutic but not psychotherapy games, I do think there's a particular important value around having clear conversations about, like, at what point is this maybe something that we shouldn't be doing at this table, and you should be talking to a therapist about it, or ensuring that somebody who is playing at your table kind of has that extra support. One of the things that we've seen come up kind of as we've done panels like this before is people talking about times where they've been in games in which someone else at the table was clearly using the game as something for them to work through, and the GM might have known about it or might not have, but like the other player didn't necessarily get to consent to that, and so all of a sudden they were in someone else's therapy session without knowing, and that is absolutely a huge problem, because of course there's going to be things where something might come up in a game where you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was going to be a problem for me, and I now have to deal with this in the moment. But that difference between, like, I'm intentionally going into work on something, if you're doing that, you need to make sure that the people around your table know, and that y'all have a plan for if things get too intense, both for the individual who's working on stuff, but also the other people at the table. I often kind of recommend against working on those like more heavy topics in that peer setting, without additional support.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Some common RPG tools, also session zeros for campaigns. Both Shay and Elizabeth kind of brought up the idea of like having people send in your triggers or the like. For me as a GM, sometimes I'm considering also just what is the scope of what I'm putting on my players to tell me beforehand. So instead of saying, like, you go into a doctor's office and it's like, the check boxes of, or 50 different check boxes of which of these are you allergic to, and instead just be like, hey, this is going to be a 5-session campaign that's going to involve punching some spiders, rescuing some kids, and a little bit of like PTSD. So just tell me about those. I don't expect any other problems going in, and that way you as players are also primed to kind of understand that that's what is going to be the potential emotional risk, and you can kind of navigate that as opposed to an open-ended.
Oh yeah, content warnings. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the other thing that you were all actually talking about in the GM tips panel was the deck of player safety. It was a really, really cool one that Tom brought up, and that is involved. Elizabeth, have you heard of that one a little bit?
I have heard of that one. Yeah, I got to see it at Con a little while ago.
Cool. I was gonna say for everybody in the audience who wasn't a part of that panel, I'll go really shortly and really quickly. The deck of player safety is very, very similar to like a consent form happening, where this deck is full of phobias, things that make you uncomfortable, touchy subjects, and all that stuff. And there's multiple versions of that item in the deck, and it goes out anonymously, and people pull those things out of the deck that they themselves do not want to be handling during the game session, and then they all get shuffled back together and handed to the GM. So it's entirely anonymous of what should or will or won't be in a session. So everybody has a chance to say something or not say something. And there's even items in the deck that are like, yeah, I'm totally fine with anything, and that can get slid in totally anonymously. A really good way to establish like boundaries really quickly in like a pickup game session really fast if you like don't have a chance to fill out that like pre-session session 0 consent form. I was gonna say, oh, there it is.
There we are.
Thank you, Adam, for pulling that. That was not part of like the preset images for this panel, and he pulled that out amazingly. Thank you so much. You are awesome. Secret producer who has been in every single one of these panels secretly, and we haven't told anybody about it.
Huh?
I
was gonna say I really like the options where like John said, you're not just saying what do you want or not want, because especially if you're thinking about new players who have not engaged before, this is a totally different system or a totally different setting. They may not have reasonably the understanding of like what scope of anything in the world that I'm not okay with is something that is potentially relevant to this game or that I should be explicitly telling people about.
And if you only give them 3 topics to consider, one of them might be one where they're like, I've never considered this before, but since there are only 3 of these, I'm willing to take a couple minutes to ponder it.
I don't know what a bug is, so I don't know. That's fine. You can just have bugs appear.
What do we consider
You've
a
hit
bug?
upon an entomology trigger for me now. I got it.
But what do you consider a bug? Like butterflies are okay, but the centipede ones, it's just like a no-go.
How many legs does it cut off?
I was gonna say how many eyeballs and doesn't it have mandibles?
The other tool that I'll bring up though is chats after the game. It's really easy, especially for us as gamers, to be like, all right, we're done, we're out, never talk to each other again until the next session. But it can be really helpful to end your session 5 or 10 minutes early, and just as people are very gradually packing up and socializing, like, how'd things go? Is there stuff you want to see more of? Is there stuff you don't want to see as much? The same thing goes for taking periodic breaks during a game. Can be an opportunity while most people are running off to go refill their drinks or whatever, to hold back a player for a moment, just chat for a minute or two and be like, I'm noticing this. Is this good? Do you need something else? Just those moments of casual but consistent communication can open up a lot of opportunities, because it's very easy to overly stereotype, and this is partly based on my own upbringing. Like, a lot of gamers are raised to be kind of passive aggressive, to suffer silently and then to go into some big outburst or problem behavior, and so giving them channels in which to express their pleasure or displeasure in a healthy way can really help to head off issues before they grow into something bigger.
And I really like the wrapping up thing. I always kind of try and add in a little buffer whenever I'm finished, whenever I schedule games and things, is for that last 5-10 minutes to really just sort of be a kind of moment where like everybody lets out a breath, and we we'll talk about something that happened during the session, or sometimes we won't. Sometimes we'll just talk like, oh yeah, during the session my dog hopped up on the table and did a little jig, and it was really funny, and I couldn't tell you because we were in the middle of your character's great aunt's chihuahua Wawa's funeral, so it would have been inappropriate, but it was happening, and things like that. And it's just a very useful little feature. I find that it prevents the word that we haven't used yet. It prevents character bleed. For anybody who's not familiar with the concept of character bleed, it's when your character and the things that are happening to your character start to kind of go into your own feelings and your own interpretations of what's happening to yourself. I have experienced characters with very heavy character bleed, and I've kind of experienced characters where I have no character bleed and I have no connection to them. I have found that the closer you make the character to kind of who you are and what you've been through, the more bleed you're going to have. And that is something that you should, talk with your GM and the other players about if you're experiencing that very heavily. Marissa, I see you touching your nose.
Sorry, but no, what you're saying about character bleed and having it lean into you as your person playing as your characters, we actually just had an audience question come in about issues with TTRPGs in modern settings where you as the character is how it is played, and any tips about handling situations like that with character bleed and like you as the character in those more modern setting games.
So like I am playing John as a PC.
Yeah.
It looks like that the way that they framed it is I seem to be having issues with playing anything in a modern setting, Shadowrun, Power Rangers, you as characters. Any tips for going about that?
I think before we jump into the tips, which yes, I'm sure we all have tips. When we think about character bleed, we often think about it in terms of like, oh, I am now experiencing like the same amount of distress or anger or frustrations and those more challenging emotions. But when we're thinking about that bleed or that psychological space between ourselves and our character, sometimes that is also the good stuff. And we can use that when we are working on supporting players, right? So some of this is thinking about the way that you are talking to your players in terms of like a win or a setback or a challenge, where like your character is really struggling with this right now versus, wow, like you did it. And so thinking about kind of that balance that GMs can use to help players kind of navigate that space back and forth can be beneficial. But sometimes leaning into that character bleed, provided you have the ability to kind of like step back and move back, can be really valuable. One of the biggest issues we run into with character bleed is when it starts to negatively impact the relationships around the table. So if I am getting so frustrated by something that another player's character is doing, that I am now frustrated with that player, that is something that is important to talk about. That can also happen not just necessarily from like a bleed perspective, like maybe that player keeps intentionally having their character do something that they know I as a player absolutely despise.
The
so
dreaded it's what my character would do.
Yeah.
Then that's a conversation around like when we're talking about that consent process, some of that is also like what kind of character, like what kind of party do we want to be? Do we want to all be the heroes? Do we want to kind of be lackadaisical, maybe a little backstabby? There's no right or wrong answer, but if you have players with really misaligned goals, that can be miserable for everyone at the table.
One of the biggest threats in the character bleed arena that I found is dealing with failure. And this is another one of those things that RPGs can be really useful for. And from a GMing perspective, it's really good to kind of mentally think through some scenarios in which there might be like a total party kill, TPK, or they totally fail the chase scene and the villain gets away and their hometown burns down, whatever the case, and kind of workshopping in your head, how would I handle this? And how would I handle this in a way that's going to help to, keep everybody having fun to some extent, but also in the case of some of your players, perhaps help them to deal with a situation of failure that is causing that character bleed over to them, and that these players might not have healthy tools for dealing with failure. I've run into a lot of these players where it's like, I can't believe you only gave me 1 of 2 prestige points for this scenario. You've ruined my entire weekend. Everything fails. Like, you're a 7th level fighter. Deal with it. But kind of one of the classic examples is, okay, the TPK, it's like, did we end the campaign or have we just been captured? Now we can escape. Now we can continue telling a story. I, as a GM, am communicating kind of out of the game, like, it's cool. We'll roll with it. Don't sweat it. I know tactics didn't work out. I know the dice didn't work out for you. It'll be fine. So just understand that can be one of the issues that can be a hidden trigger that you're not talking about in the session zeros. And it can also be something that some of your players may or may not be well equipped to deal with. So the more you can think in advance of how to handle that, the better.
Are you saying, John, that perhaps gamers don't like to lose?
Gamers game the system for various reasons. Sure.
Absolutely. I think that the GM has so much power in that space, even in terms of the way that we are talking about the thing that is failure, right? Like, are we like, oh man, this is so cool that this is happening, because like I was not expecting this, but this creates like a really interesting puzzle for us to solve. Is the GM like, y'all fell into my trap, you're too stupid to play in my game, right? Like that kind of shift back and forth can be really impactful in terms of like the way that players are seeing, like, oh, how am I supposed to interpret this success or failure? If the GM is just playing it really, really flat, that may kind of raise that tension, which players may or may not be comfortable with that level of ambiguity about kind of success or failure.
And one quick thing on because I realized we kind of veered off of the person's question about like modern games. So especially if you're having everybody play themselves in an RPG, one of the most important things that I have found, two of them. One is, let's just kind of take a snapshot of where we are now, and whatever our characters do later on, let's not hold it against each other. So if Shay kills my character in that game, I'm not going to hold a grudge against Shay or wonder if they're going to turn me into a true crime documentary later on. So that's one thing. But the other one was I think it was like a college game, like on breaks or something. Us running a D20 modern game where we decided to play ourselves in kind of a mythos-ish variant. And we decided to do the most destructive character creation thing possible, which was, all right, now we're going to see about determining our strength scores. Let's go around the table and say, what do you think John's strength score is? And the more you go down that ability score list, whoop, boy, the more dangerous it gets. You don't know who your real friends are or aren't until you reach charisma. And so that also meant that we had some characters who ended up having, like stat block lines that were like 85 points. And we had a couple who were just like, I have mostly 10s and 11s. I don't know how I feel about this. So go in with an understanding of how closely are we keen to cleave to what we think reality is for what we are as people. And how about we just kind of say, let's make something based on a real John Compton, and agree that that'll be close enough.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, I'm holding on my nose because basically what you were telling happened to one of my classmates in college, where they had a high school game where the GM basically made them as characters, and it was very insulting. Yeah. Where they basically handed out the character sheet of here you are as your as your character, as what I think your stats are, and
So don't do that, especially without permission.
I'm gonna borrow a phrase that we use in my game server a whole bunch, is that GM needs to do their shadow work, where they need to, for those unfamiliar with the concept of shadow work, it's where you kind of take a moment to look into yourself and find like the little bits that need to be worked on, and that GM needs it.
I would say, like, if you're finding that you tend to like get more stuck in your character in the kind of modern games, I would think about, like, is this facets of my character? Am I expected to create like myself, or is it just like we're playing as humans, and so I'm gonna end up feeling very similar to me? Is it things about the setting? When COVID started, I was running a game in which like a magical plague was sweeping the land, and then like February 2020 hit, and we went, maybe we need to like very quickly transition this storyline away, because this does not feel fun anymore. It was fun 2 months ago. It is no longer fun.
Yeah.
So figuring out, is it the characters themselves? Is it the setting? Because there may be some settings that you find less fun or less engaging at different times. If it's the character piece, you may think about, are there other types people, types of characters I could play that are a little bit farther away from me, myself, and I.
And I want to touch on that just briefly. We also, and this is mainly for me and John, as people who work in game design and everything. One of the things that we kind of have as a responsibility of people who are making active products that people actively work with and play on a regular basis. I mean, APs drop once a month, every month for so long, and and in Pathfinder Society, we drop about 2 scenarios a month. We kind of have to be aware of what's going on around in the world. It's a lot harder with APs because I know they have a lot longer turnaround, but we have over in OP it's about 6 to 8 months between when we start conceptualizing to when we actually release the scenario, something like that. Somebody else can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm bad at math. But if you're designing games and if you're working on things like that and you're just you're creating something where people are going to play within a system, you really need to be cognizant of what's happening around you and be willing to sort of look at something and go, that was a great idea before the curse of the flying pigs arrived and the pigs took over Canada. Now I should maybe take my year of the pig conquerors and maybe step back from that and maybe walk away.
But Shay, I
and
had
do
so many
something.
scenario ideas that were puns on Canadian bacon.
Well, Canada's now been conquered by pigs.
Sorry, all of us are also laughing at what our secret sneaky producer is putting in chat. Oh.
But so somebody mentioned to me once, they're like, it's really interesting that you're now putting content warnings in your APs and in your organized. Actually, we are doing that in APs, right, John? I don't know.
When there's something that's a particularly a larger theme, and it's usually less of like a content warning on the very front. And what I tend to do is I will include a sidebar as that part is approaching, and be like, this the next couple scenes deal a lot with this, or like with this body horror stuff. Like, gauge your players' reactions. It can always just be the zombies are being zombies, as opposed to the zombies are throwing, I don't know, intestine ropes at you. So
sorry.
The zombies are playing jump rope.
Giving Shay more ideas, apparently. Yeah.
Just a lot of cowboy zombies.
And use double or knots in order to connect the two together in a double dutch yellow. So basically, you gotta set the little bit of standards, and I tend to approach this as in a conversational sidebar because it helps to coach the reader on what the intention is with this thing and what is or isn't really important.
Yep. And we've started doing that over an organized play as well. At the beginning of scenarios, we'll be like, hey, this scenario, it's only 4 hours long, so it's very brief, but it's like we touch on themes of body horror, of imprisonment, things like that, and it's something that we've kind of taken to. And somebody was like, that's really interesting that you're doing that. Did you get complaints or anything? We're like, no, we just figured out at a certain point, like, it's just worth it to step up and be like, hey, it's our job to let you know what's going on in this, so that you don't walk into it and go, oh no, this has sent me into a terrible space, and now I'm mentally spiraling.
As someone who is representing the mental health and games org on this panel, I'm so glad that y'all are doing content warnings. I think sometimes the internet gets real weird about content warnings. It has all sorts of feelings in all sorts of directions. But if you like turn on a TV show and it says like rated TV-13 for like these reasons, that is also a version of a content warning, right? And having that knowledge of like, oh, do I want to engage in this, or do I want to play this game while my 6-year-old is in the room, or while my 13-year-old is in the room, or do I want to play this game while I am at my parents' house? Like those, it is not always just like mental health related. Some of it is like, oh, is this a good game to play before we're camping in the woods for 6 weeks? So thinking about about that. We do actually see these more and more in more places, and they allow people to just make decisions similar to the way that, hey, is this a comedy or a horror? Allows me to make a decision about whether or not it's something I want to watch today.
What do you mean watching Blair Witch Project before my camping trip's a bad idea?
I mean, for some people, it would enhance their camping trip.
Yeah.
That would not be the case for me, but for some people, it would.
All right. We are getting really close to the end, and I cannot be a hypocrite when I'm yelling at all of my coworkers about their 10-minute warning and to wrap it up. So I feel like this last question is a great one to close it out with. Do we have any resources for players looking to get into therapeutic gameplay, whether as a facilitator or a patient player?
I would recommend my book.
Always.
So
tell us more about your book.
Yeah, it's called Therapeutically Applied Role-Playing Games. The publisher is Routledge. I don't make any money off of it, so please feel free to get it from your library or wherever, but you can find it on the internet. It is definitely more of like a how-to and background aimed for therapists, but if you're somebody who's just really into or want to learn more about this, you're absolutely welcome to read it. You just have to promise me that you will not go do therapy on your friends. That's the promise that we have to have over the internet, is don't do therapy on friends.
Please leave therapy to the professionals.
If you want to get into like fully like I almost said gamified therapy, and I don't think that's how we want to refer to it. How many levels do I have in therapy?
I got 15 therapy points today in my session.
I'm winning therapy.
If I get another 12, I get another free session.
With that, I would honestly recommend probably reaching out to, if you already have a therapist, I'm sure your therapist can make a recommendation. And honestly, just at the base of it, reaching out to a therapist is not a bad idea in general. Just a reminder, you do not have to be openly neurodivergent or have had terrible things happen to you to go to therapy. You can just go to therapy. All it is there to do is to understand yourself and help you improve yourself. It is not embarrassing, and it is very, very helpful and healthy and things like that. I have done relationship therapy with my spouse. We are very happily married, and it has helped us communicate better. I have done therapy for other things that are healthy and things that are not, and it is very helpful. So
it's our whole household. So I live in a household with 6 adults. We're all roommates. It's delightful, but the bulk of us all go to therapy. So we jokingly call them our therapists. And after therapy, after a therapy session, a lot of us will just come out and talk about, and this is all consensual between all of us. We've, had this discussion. We'll talk about our therapy sessions and how it went and how things went with therapy, and if things need to be talked about amongst the roommates after that therapy session. So that's just how we've done it. And I highly do recommend also agreeing, seconding on Shay. You don't need anything going on in your life to have therapy. It's sometimes just really nice to have that outside ear who doesn't have as much of a personal, not a personal grasp, but personal attachment to what's going on, to get just that outside. I'm going to remember the word after this panel is over.
Perspective.
Thank you. An outside perspective of anything that's happening in your life.
Yeah.
No particular physical tools on my end that I'm going to recommend, but understand that when you're going into games, whether you are thinking that it's going to be therapeutic or not, examining yourself and some of your relationships with people in that group and saying, like, what are going to be some of the trigger points? What am I really trying to get out of this? And how can I open up lines of communication are really going to be the key things. Because again, I'm coming from a Midwest and Deep South perspective, where in both of those, we're kind of stereotypically passive aggressive, and the bless your heart is not in fact a compliment level of thing. So understand that things can build up in yourself, and it's important to take a break when you need to, recognize when it is fun, when it isn't fun, and be willing to put a pause on things and or switch roles, switch your hats to communicate.
And as a physical tool, I would strongly recommend probably looking into, obviously, Elizabeth's book. I actually have a copy of that. It's over on one of my other bookshelves. But I would also recommend the opening of the Monster Hearts to, I realize I keep referencing Monster Hearts. I work for Paizo. I make Pathfinder products.
Do you?
But the opening of the Monster Hearts 2-player rulebook, a core rulebook, is it talks about how this is a very like intense kind of game, and how, you know, steps that you can take to kind of walk that back, and steps that you can take to lean into that, and it discusses the consent of everything, and how the archetypes lean into different kinds of traumas and such, and it's very informative, and I think it's honestly the first section of that. I am trying to remember the name of the author of the Monster Hearts 2 rulebook off the top of my head, and I cannot. I know I can see her Twitter in my mind's eye, but I cannot remember her name. But she wrote it very, very. It's such a brilliant piece of advice for anybody who's thinking about working in therapeutic games, that I can only recommend it to basically everybody I know.
Actually, I'll add in one more slightly physical tool of culture references or media references. Some people do not communicate cleanly in words, especially when it comes to emotional things. But if you go in and say, we're going to be running roughly this game, here are a couple of movies or books that would be on theme. Are there any of these that you felt went too far? Are there any of these that you feel are too flippant or anything like that? And they can be like, I'm totally on board with, you know, Jurassic Park level dinosaurs, but not this other thing level of dinosaur, whatever, you know. But being able to point to some references and tools can also help there.
I have one more reference. So Gardens of Fog is a module that Take This released, and Dr. B, I believe, was the main author, but not the only author on that. So it's not just Dr. B. But that is a great module. It has you. It does a lot of really nice like personification of like depression and sadness. I will say it like emotionally hits harder than expected, especially if you have a good GM. So like I'm a therapist, I do a lot of trauma and substance use work. I do like work with like child trauma, like I get in the dark stuff all the time. And I played that for the first time on stream and was like, oh, this is like I am okay. And also this is more emotional than I thought. So if you are someone who's like, I think I want to dig into that and just kind of see what that is, that can be a really awesome module. Make sure that everybody else is like consenting. You'll all have the ability to keep yourselves safe and happy, but Gardens of Fog is really, really well written, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Bluebeard's Bride is a lot like that, especially if you have dealt with misogyny in your life at any point. Bluebeard's Bride is a fantastic experience, and if you've never dealt with misogyny in your life, I would recommend playing it too, so you can understand where people are coming from when they're talking about it.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. And like I said, I do have to be I cannot be the hypocrite who lets us run all the way to the end when I'm yelling at everybody else to get off the stream and make room for everybody else. So
You can. It's called role playing.
It's therapeutic.
It's therapeutic. Okay, so I'm going to close this up before I throw it around for everybody to introduce themselves and where you can find them one more time. I do want to thank Elizabeth one more time for being with us from Take This. For Mental Health Awareness Month, we did partner with Take This for our silent auction with Organized Play this year. We have a bunch of amazing Pathfinder and Starfinder sanctioning. All the proceeds benefiting that silent auction are going to Take This year. Oh, perfect. And in the chat, you can see the QR code if you want to go check out the website. All right, I will throw it around for everybody to introduce themselves one more time. And Elizabeth, since I'll happily close with you.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. You can find me at some places on the internet at Dr. Kilmer, doctors all spelled out, and also over at Take This. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Shay?
Hi, I'm Shay. I'm one of the Pathfinder Society developers. You can find me at Spells and Sugar pretty much anywhere on the internet, and I will also be in the Paizo event server after this in the chat for Therapeutic TTRPGs, answering questions for about the next hour or so.
Well, thank you. I missed that. All right, and John.
I'm John Compton. I tend to hang out on Discord, including in the Pathfinder and Starfinder fan Discord servers, and I'll be on the Paizo events for the next while.
Awesome. Thank you. And like they all said, if you are in the Paizo events server, we do have post-panel discussions for every single panel that we have had today. Go to check them out in the Therapeutics and TTRPGs. I've been Marissa Marie. I've been your moderator. You can find me all over the internet at Marissa Marie. Thank you all so much. We'll see you later.
Bye.